So thank you everyone for joining the 70th Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign webinar. Today is Tuesday, the 25th of June, 2024. And this is the State of Trees, June 2024, Wrangling of Tree Data, Building the Bridge Between Your Field Measurements and Satellite Data. Now, I know there are some new folks on here, so I want to do quick introductions of our campaign team, because I know you may not know everyone, but I'm Brian Campbell. I'm the campaign lead, and I'm based at the NASA Wallops Flight Facility, and I'm the Globe Observer Tree Science lead for this campaign, and I'm the ICESat-2 mission, the Ice Cloud and Land Elevation Satellite 2 mission at NASA. I'm the education lead for that, and I'm the Earth Science liaison at the NASA Wallops Flight Facility. So I basically work with the Earth Science here, and get it out to all the different NASA centers. Peder Nelson, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Glad to do it. And I'm Peder Nelson, and I am a Globe partner in Oregon in the United States. And I am the science lead for the Globe Observer Land Cover Tool. And so if you have any questions about site definitions or where to start with your science, and especially how to connect it to satellite measurements, that's where I sit and spend all my time. So I'm looking forward to diving into this a little bit later and hopefully helping everybody with their research.
Yep, thank you, Peder. Yes, you will hear a lot from Peder very soon with the presentation. So, Peder Falcon, could you introduce yourself, please?
Would love to. Hi, everyone. I'm Peder Falcon. I work at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is in Pasadena, California. I'm a Globe partner and also a master trainer as well.
Excellent. Yeah. So Peder Nelson, Peder Falcon, and I have been working together for a long time through the life of this Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign, and some before. And I've worked with Peder Falcon, for a long, long time, back with other missions and, missions prior to this and other campaigns as well. So, the three of us love working together and want to bring to you the best we can with the webinars and looking at the data, talking about NASA satellite data, talking about globe data, and how everything can be used, viewed, analyzed, all these things. So, and there's lots and lots of variables involved, and we try to distill it down to, the most appropriate ways to do it without causing too many headaches for students and researchers alike. So, let's begin a little bit with some introductions. And, this quote may seem strange, but I kind of like it. It's by author Mark Twain, and it is, "Data is like garbage. You better know what you are going to do with it before you collect it." And, it may seem like a little bit of a harsh statement, but it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because if you're going to be collecting data, whether it be doing hands-on data collection or even collecting data that you get from a database, okay, you can collect a lot of data in a short amount of time. And, this goes back to like the scientific method. If you're going to go collect data or through observations, you really want to come up with some hypotheses as to, well, some science question, and then some hypotheses that help guide you to whatever you're going to do with that data. So I really like this quote. So that kind of gets us into what we're going to talk today about, the whole data wrangling process and what Peder's going to bring to you. So once again, this is just the introduction section. Then we're going to talk about wrangling data with Peder Nelson, where we're going to focus on several things. Looking at multiple years of survey conditions, how you decide when your data is ready for analysis, how you take measurements and what those measurements mean, basically extracting information from those measurements. And then there's other data sets we can look at, and I'll come on later on and go over something called Open Altimetry, which we've had on the webinars multiple times before, but it's always a tool that is changing. And then we have lots of the ICESat-2 data coming in, but we'll get into that in a second. And then we're going to set up for kind of the end of this webinar. We're going to set up for our next webinar, which is going to come to you live from the 2024 Globe Annual Meeting in Fredonia, New York. And that will be on July 16th at the same time at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time. So, and then I have a couple graphics I'm going to show you, and then we'll have more of that, of course, with SUNY Fredonia, State University of New York in Fredonia, next month. And then we'll have some final thoughts. We'll have some question and answers here in the middle, during the presentations. Peter Falcon will go through that information with you, how to do the question and answer session. So I did some data stats again. As you know, I always like to do that. And I pull you down to year 6 here, which is what we're in, which began 1 October 2023. And we have lots of observations coming in. We have over 30,800 measurements from over 8,400 global sites this year so far. So you can see, hopefully we will top year 5, and you can see each year we've gotten more and more observations from more global sites. So actually, I should say when you get here in the middle, year 4, we had fewer global sites, but we had more measurements than the year before. So that means people were taking some repeat measurements, in certain areas at certain locations. And then what I like to say here is we finally hit, since the life of the campaign began on September 15, 2018, we are now over 200,000 observations of tree height, land cover, and greenings since the campaign began on that September 15th, 2018 date. So we just hit that recently. Actually, it was this morning after I was doing some photo review. We have over 200,000 observations that have come in during the life of the campaign. And that's a lot of data for students and professional researchers to use when they're looking at change over time, because we're just under 6 years of the campaign. And 5 years is kind of that gold standard at NASA, where we really look at how things are changing over a 5-year time period. So, we're excited to see that. And on the right side, you can see some metrics as well. How many webinars we've had. This is the 70th actual campaign webinar, but we've had 18 special webinars throughout the last 5.5 or so years. So, it actually brings us to 88 webinars for the campaign. We have 73 blogs out there with almost 260,000 views, and we have participants from 63 countries out of the 127 countries. Now, how is that defined? It's defined, these are countries that are active. They come to some folks from these countries come to multiple webinars every year and are very active in the data collection. There are some countries that aren't, of course, out of the 127, there's a bunch that aren't part of this campaign, but they are still taking data. It's just we don't see them at the webinars, which is okay, because the data, we love to have them here, but the data is super important to get into the database for students to use for research projects, as well as professional researchers to use as well for data comparisons to satellite data. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, our next campaign webinar will be the State of Trees, July 2024, live from the 2024 Globe Annual Meeting in Fredonia, New York, USA. What does it mean to satellite match tree height and land cover? And the background you see there and the background you see behind me as I talk is the main campus of the State University of New York. You can see it's like a clock. It's got this great, circular, shape here. And where you see that red arrow, that is in an area called, it's a Forever Wild Nature Preserve right on campus. And a lot of the folks at SUNY, including Dr. Mike Jabat, he may be on here, I'm not sure though, but he is the host for the annual meeting. But when I'm talking to him, they do a lot of research in that forested area. So we're going to try to, fingers crossed, use that location to do a live webinar. That we did one from a park in Guadalajara, Mexico back in November. Last month, we did it live from the Japan Geoscience Union meeting in Chiba, Japan. I was there in person. So we're going to do another ambitious live webinar for the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign. So that will be webinar number 71 at the same time as we're doing now on the 16th. Now, I want to mention, though, some of you on here may be attending the annual meeting in person. That would be great. And you feel free to come join us in person. Where we're going to be doing the webinar from is just a short walk, maybe 10 minutes from where we're actually having the main annual meeting, which is going to be a little further south of where we see, just outside the circle. You can see on the background where it says Mason Hall. It's just south of there where we're going to be having the actual annual meeting, the majority of it. But we will be outside often, so
Brian, I
feel
was
free.
going to say that Mike did join. If he wanted to, you want to give him a moment to do a few things. But yeah, he just joined us recently, just right now.
Hey, yep. We're very informal here. So, Mike, do you want to pop in and say anything about the what I just mentioned, the Forever Wild location on your campus? I can't tell if he's muted or trying to talk or
I
not.
don't see his mic active.
Okay.
So maybe it's just not plugged in properly yet.
That's okay. We can come back. We'll come back to it. We'll come back to Mike. All right. So I'm going to have this slide before I introduce Peder Nelson again. This is something that I found. I found a combination of what actually wrangling data is. It's actually it's a term. Okay, so data wrangling is the process of gathering, selecting, and transforming raw data into a more useful format so it can be used for analysis or machine learning. And this is what Peder Nelson has been talking to all of us about for a long time, being a data scientist and a researcher at Oregon State University. He's really focusing on gathering that data, making sense of that data, transforming it into something that we can all understand, and that'll be useful from local environments all the way through global environments. And many of you know, if you go and seek out data, maybe it's data that you didn't take with the GLOW program, but if it's data from NASA or NOAA or some of your agencies where you're located, the countries you're located, sometimes that data isn't very useful because it's in a format you can't do anything with. A lot of that raw data is specific in that it requires certain computer programs or certain analysis techniques that all of us don't have. So Peter's been really focusing on how to take that data, gather it. How do you gather it? How do you select the data that you want? What does the data mean? What does it mean when there's no data somewhere, like null hypothesis? What does it mean when there's no data somewhere? Okay, all of these things have something to do with wrangling data. So therefore, I'm going to pass it over to Peder Nelson now to talk about this wrangling data. And Peter, I threw up this graphic here because I know this is near and dear to your heart right now, and because it's just amazing what you've done with this. And I know you showcased this at last month's webinar, both part 1 and part 2 of last month's webinar, the one in Japan and then one later on in the day. So let me go ahead and once again pass it over to Peder Nelson. And Peter, I'll stop sharing and take it away.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate all the students who've joined us. And I hope that we can give you a head start on doing some research today. So if you have any questions about what we're doing or how we're doing this, let us know and we will try to clarify. But one of the nice things is Brian does record these. And so you can actually see this recording later on the website, and he does a good job of cutting this down so you can just focus on those methods that we've highlighted over the last 70 webinars. And so like Brian was mentioning, really our job here with the Globe Science and the Globe program is to connect to the satellite data that is happening and being used to describe our locations. And so what I want to do is walk us through a little bit of what Brian was mentioning. Okay, so one of the things is there is a lot of satellite data out there. Okay, and one place to go and just start exploring is this site called Worldview. And the nice thing is right here on the front, when you first go to it, there are some nice tutorials or data examples that you might want to go explore. So, one of the things we've always talked about here is fires and where they occur and how they might change a forest. And so there is a whole layer inside of here that NASA provides globally to highlight hotspots on the world. And so that can show you maybe where a fire or vegetation is getting burned in a location. And one of the other neat things that has recently come on is this surface water extent. And so one of the questions we also have is, what happens to the trees right along the edges of water bodies? And those are dynamic places where we do see trees falling into rivers or erosion around the banks. And that might set up the questions of what protocol you might use when you go out to these locations. And so you can see that here is a product that is coming from a satellite and with a particular sensor. And what this means is this data right here is giving you 250 meter pixels measurements on the ground. This one over here, you notice they're now giving you 30-meter resolution on the ground. And so this is one of our challenges as scientists, is trying to figure out the data, how big on the ground it is actually making that measurement, and how does that relate to our measurements, our Globe Observer photos, or those trees that we're measuring, and all of the other protocols where you go out and you actually are measuring things. So I want to highlight that this is a really, really powerful tool. And one of the things that, again, as you go down, you can really start to see even how something like Earth at night, how bright our lights are, can tell us something about who's living there. And one of the things that you'll find is that there are certain places in the world where they actually illuminate their trees at night to help them grow and to help them flower and to put on fruit that then gets shipped around the world. And so, not only can you see Earth, lit up during the day like this, but you can also explore what your areas look like at night. And sometimes what we see is trees block that light that you see on the ground. Other times, because of where lights are located, they really light up the night sky. And those are places where we don't see as much tree cover as well. So, this dynamic of Earth at night really is something that keys us in on where people are living. So you might not have ever thought about how nighttime imagery from space can actually give us some information about where trees are located and even that arrangement of things. So, these are some of the places where you can go and you can find out what data is available out there. And one that I want to start off and highlight here, you'll see, I mean, there's just a lot of different options. So one thing you can always do is go into the science disciplines, and you can see that when we're talking about biosphere, there is a lot of information, including numbers that tell you how much carbon is in an area, or describing the tree canopy itself. There are these particular forests that we've highlighted in the past, the mangroves, that really are only occurring in certain areas of the world. And so, this way of searching can help you to connect maybe a theme of what you're learning in your class with particular data sets here. Okay, so one of the things that we can look for here is there is a something that really works well for our globe world. And this is something that I'm going to come back to and talk about. Globe uses a global grid to help us arrange ourselves on the world. And so you'll see this way of referencing your site, MGRS. And that is a particular reference system. And so we'll highlight that later. But the nice thing is, there is a whole new high resolution imagery that is getting referenced to this global grid. And so when you turn this on, you can search for it, you can find it like this. And one of the things that when you start seeing this, I'm going to turn off some of this, is you start to see this global grid that that Globe uses to reference you in the world. So there's two ways of finding yourself, and this is really important because we really, not only care about what you're measuring, but where you're measuring it. And that really makes a big difference because that's what NASA science is really all about. It's where these things are occurring. And so you see there is this reference system that gives you this string of numbers. Well, that it actually allows us to group things together by degrees. And so you'll see that term latitude and longitude as a way of finding yourself in the world. Well, as you can see, there is a certain sequence to these numbers here that allow us to find our place on Earth. And what I want to highlight here is you can move over, and I'm going to just zoom in on my part of the world because I'm very familiar with it. And that's something that can be really helpful too, is starting with your location. And so, one of the things when I zoom in, you start to see the grids starting to come up. So again, when you start looking through the database, you'll start seeing this sequence of numbers and letters in the Globe database. If you use Globe Observer, if you are entering your data through the Globe interface, you might be naming your site in a different way. But I just want to highlight that all of those people who are using Globe Observer are getting an automatic site name, and that comes from this global grid that is out there. So the nice thing is, again, it helps us start grouping our data together, because one of our fundamental ideas here is that if we're to look at an area around the world, all of those measurements kind of, near that location should be sort of similar in some way. And so this ability to group our data like this really helps us to find those areas that are similar and areas that are different. Okay, so again, this type of information is really, really useful as you start thinking about connecting your data to this NASA data. And so I'm going to move on now, but I want to highlight that a really good place for you to start, for all of us to start, is to start with the GPS protocol that is out there. And what's important about this is you are making a time measurement, okay? And this allows us to locate yourself on the Earth. And this is different than placing yourself on the map. And so here, following this, you're making a measurement that has an accuracy number associated with it, which gives us some variability around your location. How close are we really to find that if somebody tries to go there again, or if we go and try to find other NASA data like we were just doing? So I want to highlight that this protocol is foundational to anything that you're doing, whether it is Globe Observer protocols and using that way of collecting data, or whether you're using measurement tapes and physically touching these things. We really need to know, where are you located? So pay attention to this GPS protocol, because there is a field guide and sheet here that has you take down your latitude, longitude, location. Again, this is really, really important, because when we go to the map, I'll show you what can end up happening. Okay, so I just want to really emphasize that this is a measurement that is happening. And there is a difference between using a global positioning system receiver and using just a mobile device. A mobile device might have this sensor, or it might figure out where you're located in a slightly different way. Okay. But just recognize that this is a place where science is improving. And so, we want to record and describe how we're making this measurement, because that gets fundamentally into what we really want to do, which is once we're in that location, what do we see there? So I want to highlight again, there are these learning activities around the biosphere that really can be used throughout any of your research. So getting to know your satellite imagery and your globe study site. So again, this is one of those things that where you might find your satellite imagery might be different than what is described here, but the idea behind it, the fundamentals behind it are still really valid, including, looking at your site. What do you see at that? The leaf classification piece is one that we get asked a lot about. Everybody wants to know, what is the tree that I'm measuring? Well, there is a nice, wonderful activity here that walks you through how to figure that out. Okay. So I wanna highlight that, because we don't have the answer for you. We don't have the whole world mapped down to the leaf, which is why we need the community of scientists working together. Okay. And then finally, as you go down, you start to see using your globe data to analyze land cover, making your own land cover map. And then, importantly, I want to highlight, we have an accuracy assessment tutorial here. Again, we have lots of data out there. And so you might actually just skip over making your own map and go to this accuracy assessment. But again, only reason why we know your data might be worthwhile, might be good, is first understanding that location. So I want to really stress that there is a lot of activities that are here available, described in this biosphere set of learning activities. Okay. And I want to stress very much that our collection here is historical and also for current use. And so we want to think about and recognize that we are part of the data life cycle here. And the decisions that we make and how we make our measurements really will affect what other people understand about the world. And the nice thing is, we don't have to really think about this very much. This is where the GLOBE program is facilitating our science. They have already planned some of the activities and the ways that we are managing this. But we get to actually create the data. We get to submit it to the database. We get to then use it in some way. And then importantly, we can think about how we share this back, because you're going to manipulate and work with this data, and we really don't want you to destroy it. We'd like you to share it back to the community and help us to improve our processes, and help us to figure out what to do, where to measure next. So I want to really stress the data life cycle as a framework, as a way that we're actually doing science here. Okay. And so, with that, I want to go to where everybody should go initially, which is the Globe Visualization System. It's a map. It's a place where you can start looking at the data once it leaves your mobile device or once you submit it into the Globe database. And so, everything that we're going to do in terms of data wrangling or trying to understand our measurements really comes from this database. And so this map is one way that we're actually seeing this. And I want to stress, this is an open street map. Okay. So it looks different and is different than what you'll see inside of Globe Observer, which is a map produced by the company Google. So you will actually see differences there when you zoom in on locations. So these thematic maps can both help you, but they can also lead you astray because somebody has decided what's important. Okay, and and as we go in, and you can see again, you can, if you know your site name, you can actually go in and you can search for that right here. But usually I don't, at least at first. And so I need to go in, and I'm going to turn on the photos, because I find this is a really a useful piece between what is happening, whether you do tree heights or whether you do the land cover tool within Globe Observer. I want to highlight here, when you take a photo, you are actually doing remote sensing just like those satellites up in space. Okay, so we can actually think about our data in a very similar way. What is our field of view? What might we expect to see based on those colors that we capture or see and record in our photos? Okay, and so I think one of the things that automatically comes up that I want you to start thinking about, and is a personal decision, and sometimes comes back to the data available, is what is the length of time that you want to study? Okay, as Brian alluded to, there's supposedly 200,000 observations available to you in over the 6 years of this campaign. And here we're just going to look at the most recent year. And so this might be a decision that you make, based off of the available data. You can't do 5 years worth of study if you don't have 5 years worth of data, right? And so, this takes a little while in this format, because it's grabbing all of these image chips and it's trying to populate this map. So this takes a little while, to actually get things to show up. And so I'm going to let that spin for a little bit, because I want to highlight, here you can view the table. You can download this layer as a feature, a format called keyhole markup language, a .kml. And at this point, that is pretty generic and can be read by a lot of different mapping programs. So this is one way that you can access this data and start using it. Okay, so I want to highlight that because this is one of the hardest things, is just getting your data back from the database. So if you do that, again, you'll only be getting the last year's worth of data, but that is a good way of accessing that. Okay, and so one of the things that we're seeing here is the tree photos are still loading, but we can see the land cover photos available from the last year. And I want to stress, one of the things that I do right here is I'll zoom in on the location where I took my photo to make sure that it showed up in the database. And so I want to stress, here I'm just going to zoom in to try to see those details and see through some of the clutter that is here. Okay. Again, when you do this, it has to redraw everything, so it can take a little bit of time if you have a lot of this data on here, right? So this is one of those challenges of working with a map program. Okay, so while that is up and spinning, I want to again highlight the other way that you can get at the data that you're really after. And this gets a little bit more complicated because we're starting to work with the database itself to see what is in there. And so I want to highlight that there is a lot that you can work with in this way, but it gets more complicated. And so what I want to do is I'm going to go down, and I want to actually scroll down, and STTTTTT. Here we have one called tree heights. Okay, so inside of here is a way that you can select what you're after, what protocol you're after. You can change these dates, and clearly it's not 2018 anymore. And so let us extend that out to our current date, right? 2024. And let's take that out to 06 and 25. Okay, and you can do some more selection and everything like this, but I am just going to follow this and just get a little sample of what this data looks like in the database or what it might come out as. Again, it's the nice thing is you have, here is the actual query that you can put into a web address and you will actually get this response back. Okay, and this is where the data that we're going to start kind of working through. And again, one of the things that really always surprises me is you're out there and you use Globe Observer, and all of a sudden you have actually created about anywhere from 30 to 70 attributes of that location. And you can start to see right here that this person did not record the tree height circumference of that location. We can see that it came through the Globe Observer app. And we can also see that here is a tree height, the average getting reported back at 9.85 meters tall. And then importantly, right, if we think back about what we did when we made that measurement, is that here is the location where we can actually see that particular tree. So you can always, find things, and here is that particular location. This is a great time for us to sort of talk about quality of images, because again, one of the first things that we need to do is actually look at not just those numbers that are in the database, but that remote sensing piece of data that comes along with it. And really, this helps us to be more confident in that number of 9.85 meters. And part of the way that I sort of look at this is I look at the surrounding buildings or the landscape around it, and use my own knowledge, what I've seen, to see and ask, is that reasonable? Is 9.85 almost 10 or 27 feet or so reasonable for what I'm seeing in front of me? Yeah, I would actually agree with it. One thing that is really challenging here, though, is we can see that there is this thing called lens flare. On the Worldview site, you saw it referred to as sun glint, right? But this is where we have an illumination that is causing some brightness or some errors, and we can actually see the lens flaring and just some artifacts of the equipment that was used to take this photo. So it's not perfect, and so if I was to try to judge, what we could do with this, well, we would have to sort of at least describe that there is this illumination artifact inside of here. And so for some purposes, this might be so extraordinary that we would not want to use this data. Other times we could use it. We would just want to describe that this looks like it might have been taken at night. We can look at the time and sort of confer that. But the fact that it is lower illumination, our illumination is actually sky or those dark sky night lights that we could see in that satellite imagery. And this is not the optimal time to be taking an observation like this. It works. It's better than nothing because we can still see it and we can still, sort of corroborate those numbers that we're seeing. But, it's not really ideal for us. And so depending on what you want to do with this data, you might end up deciding to go forward and saying, yes, I can use this photo, or you might have to come up with a lot of little caveats and describe maybe why this wouldn't be your primary image that you would use to find other data that looks very similar. And this is one of those things that as people want to find out what type of tree this is, they want to put it into a classifier or let the computer tell us what this is. Well, this illumination right here actually would cause that process to fail. unless we had a lot of these examples going in. Okay, so this is that are sort of what we get to do with our data once it's collected, especially remote sensing data like this, can be really on a scale. And so your job as a scientist is to describe the quality and what we can actually do with this data, and not simply just say it's not useful, it can't be used. Okay, and I want to stress that because this does have value, including the fact that we see this illumination happening in where it does, and different aspects like that. So I want to stress that what somebody deems good data, to somebody else, they might deem that as poor quality data that they would not use for their research. So don't let somebody just quickly tell you, that's bad data, without asking that question, well, why? And have them try to describe a little bit more of how they're assessing that quality. And that really is, like, I want to stress, is part of our job here, is not just to make the measurement, but to actually describe the data that's coming in around it. Okay, so like I said, this is kind of the data and information that you can get out of this, and I want to highlight that. Okay, this is really neat, right? And if you download this, it comes down in a particular format that we can now open up in other mapping programs, or use in web interfaces. And so, we'll go into that a little bit more next week, but I just want to highlight that if you click the download button, as is described up here, you can get get it in these two different formats. And for mapping purposes, this GeoJSON, geography, is what we want to use. And this also stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And so on websites, you'll see that an awful lot. And so I just downloaded, these 10 records here. And so, one of the things that happens with that is you can now go in and just start working with the table itself. Start graphing out and looking at what are the latitude and longitude values, right? Are they what is expected or not? And part of the reason why I say that is because, again, we'll kind of go back to our globe viz system here. I want to zoom out to the whole world here. And I'm going to turn off the tree heights because we just got too many of those. There it is. And one of the things that I want to stress is I love that, that there's a potential for 200,000 observations to be used. One of the things that we need to always be careful about, whether it's coming from Globe Observer or whether you're entering your data in through the Globe data entry system, is we always want to double check our latitude and longitudes. And this is the most common problem that I see in the database, is that here in the last year, we don't really have too many problems. But, if I start seeing data like up in the Arctic area, I'm a little skeptical, right? And I bet there's places in your neighborhood, in your areas, where if you started seeing data there, you might start wondering, is somebody really out on that water? Is somebody really out in that location? And so, for me, I'm kind of skeptical about this one way down here in the bottom. And so, one of the things that I will do is I'll zoom into those locations and see, well, does it make sense that somebody would have made a measurement in that location? And so here, it's okay, well, it's showing up on an area. Well, that could be possible. And then when I start looking at the photos, well, it starts to look similar to what I know or would think this landscape would look like, right? Here we have icebergs out there. We have mountains, we have snow-covered mountains. So when I see that, I now actually have a better sense that that's actually in the right location. And I'm zooming out because what you'll notice is, again, we'll turn off the tree heights, but I'm going to go back to the land cover ones, because you'll see that what's really stunning is we have nearly 40,000 sites on this map. Now, again, evaluate those. Every single one should be evaluated for its location. Is it really located there? And what you'll find is that no. And the method that we use to sort of corroborate, like I said, is our maps, our other data that helps us to figure that out. And so, it looks like, yep, I'll update that. And so that will spin for a little bit of time. And one of the things, again, is when we go to summarize our data, we want to find and identify these outliers. And do they really exist? And if they do, what do we do with them? Okay, so I'm hopping over here, because this is a place where, again, I started summarizing all of those 70 attributes. And so I just wanted to show you some of the summaries that you can do out, with these land cover pieces. As Brian mentioned, inside of there, you can count the number of unique site IDs that are inside of there. And that tells us how many 100 meter by 100 meter areas there are. And so in theory, we have 27,462 unique sites. And the great thing about them is that we would hope that they would also have 6 photos associated with them. That helps us to confirm that we're actually looking in that location. And again, one of those things that we find out is that, oh, nope, not all of the data has all of the data, or all of the points have all of the data, right? So when we look through all of the 40,000 submitted observations, only 88% of them have a value in the down direction. In the up direction, only 90% of the points have that photo associated. Again, north is the one that everybody seems to be doing pretty good at, and we're not getting rejections, right? And so you can see that it's not the same. We don't have the same amount of photos or of data going around and looking at that. And so that's one thing that I'll note, because again, I want to describe the shape of my data. The other thing that being able to look at your photos, like I demonstrated, helps you to do another quick check. And so one of the things that I want to look at is, and it's the same thing with the tree photos, is, am I getting a tree in that photo? I'm expecting a tree. Am I getting it? In this case, with land cover, we're expecting a down photo. And what I mean by that is you are doing exactly like what a satellite does, looking straight down, and you are taking an observation directly down. And so I would expect to see things like feet, right? And one of the things that is really useful by putting your data together like this is you can start seeing similarities and differences as you go through your different locations. Okay, so right now I'm feeling really happy with all of these feet that are showing up in these photos. And part of that is because feet give us scale. Because our rulers and other things like that are getting actually filtered out. And so even if you put a ruler inside of here to tell us how big are these leaves and things, it would get masked out because of what is happening as photos get put into the system. So again, it's really vital for you to not just submit data, but to have an idea of what you would expect, and to go through systematically looking for inconsistencies in your data like this. And one thing that is inconsistent, right, is whether there's people in there or not, or whether we're getting that full photo of our objects on the ground. So, again, these ground photos are exactly what we're asking for from the satellite data. And like Brian and I have highlighted before, if you do this when you do your tree height observation, we would actually expect you to be standing in a spot that has clear canopy. It would be, we would expect you to actually be in a place like this. And so, this provides us that ability to, see that contrast between the clear open sky and something like that is tree covered or tree canopy covered. And so here, what's really important is that we're getting this different view from of the trees and the structure of those trees than what NASA is. And I want to highlight that one of our challenges down here on the ground is where the sun is at in the sky. And this causes that illumination difference that makes it really hard to just ask the computer to tell us what we're seeing here. Okay. And the illumination differences here, you can see that there's some brighter green areas and then there's darker green areas. All of those are leaf. And so that difference in color is more related to where the sun is at than it is related to what is actually happening with that leaf. Okay, so these photos like this are really useful. But one of the things that we're really looking for is to be able to describe what we're seeing in them, and again, how that relates to what we see when we look at our maps or our satellite imagery on something like this. Okay, so I wanted to really spend a moment there, going through and looking at really talking about the remote sensing that you're doing with these photos like this. Again, when you do land cover, you're putting that tree into context. And I think that's really, really vital, in part because I want to stress that it's not required, but 65% of our photos and sites do not have a label associated with them, right? And so one thing is, let's go find other sites in the tree database that have that same MGRS code, that same site ID. And that's one way that we might be able to sort of fill in this missing information with the land cover photos. And so, this presents a particular challenge for us. And, because we're seeing that most people are taking photos in trees that are closed canopy. Well, that's good. But there's other locations and types of trees that are out there that are not evergreen. And we'd like to get more examples of those here. And so one of the things that I just kind of wanted to stress that connection between these two different pieces. And so one of the things that I was working on before we came in here that is still running is trying to combine together all of this data. And I wanted to sort of, stress that when you start putting the data together like this, some of the things that come up that go again with this data wrangling piece. Well, from the years 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022, there's 64,000 points of tree locations. And just last year in 2023, we added another 18,000. And so, we're starting to get a volume of data that you can't open up in Excel. You only have 30,000 records there. So how we actually start working with requires us to start using data methods and software that can work with this volume of data. So one of the things that we're looking for is for communities and students and everybody to experiment around with software and ways of working with 100,000 points of tree locations around the world. Okay, it's a large amount of data. So, just working with this is a challenge. And then when you start putting together the land cover with the trees data, you have to do some more data wrangling because we're not recording the same exact information, right? So you have to align fields. You have to make sure that there is some common something that's common between these. And what's always common between us is the latitude, longitude, or that site ID. We can always put a measurement on Earth using that. And that is fundamentally what ties together GLOBE across all the 50 protocols of measuring things and the 4 different protocols of using GLOBE Observer to do remote sensing of objects. And one of the things I want to stress here is you notice that there's some tree data that is off our map. There's some land cover data that's off our map. There is this point that's down in Antarctica that is different than the ones that we looked at. And so you can actually see where there is not overlap between our data as well. So as a data scientist, I spend my time really exploring these outliers of data first. And they end up then getting rid of the ones that might be overly influential or that might not be in the right place, and we can't really use it for our analysis going forward. Okay, so I just want to stress that GLOBE database is a raw database. You really need, when you get data out of it, you need to evaluate it. You need to describe it in terms of the uncertainty and how much should we trust that value that comes out of the database. And so these are the science principles that we're working around. And so I want to highlight this piece of things, because if you don't end up with this right latitude, longitude, or your right numbers in the world, everything else with NASA science falls apart. And so one of the challenges that we've had is then trying to find tree height data that's associated with that. And so, before we hop over there and do that, one of the things that I want to sort of stress is this idea of sampling. Okay. And this goes back to, yes, we can and should work with data that is stored in a database like this. However, the shape of that data, where it falls on the world, might not actually be exactly where we need it for our questions. And this happens a lot. As you say, let's try to zoom in on this location, and we can start to see that there's a certain geographic pattern to some of our data. And that goes back to, who participates in our research, right? So that is one thing, is we have what's known as a bias to our sample. It is not evenly distributed across Earth. And it's not collected in the same way, in the same systematic way that the satellite data is. And so, Brian, will gladly show you the tracks of ICESat-2 that you have to try to, get within if you want to use that data to know how tall you are. And so, to me, this is one of the hardest and most challenging pieces of using a database that somebody else has created. It gives you insights, and it might give you some data to start with, and it might help you to answer some initial questions about what you might find in that location. So it's really valuable, but it might not have all the things that you need, the locations covered in the way that you want it to. So, so one of the things that I wanted to do is zoom in a little bit here on our host for our GLOBE annual meeting, and zoom in over here to Fredonia, New York. And one of the nice things is that as we start getting prepared for this meeting, I've been very happy that our Globe partner there and host has actually been producing a lot of data that is there. And so in the tree database, we are going to have a variety of locations and attributes that have already been measured. And you can see that some of them were even a little less than a year ago. And so, to me, this is going to be a really exciting piece is we'll be able to explore some data that has already been collected there and be able to demonstrate, well, how do we get back to this particular location? Because, well, wait, I don't have a tree latitude and longitude in the database. Well, how do I find it, right? Oh, it looks like there's this measurement latitude, measurement longitude inside of here. Well, maybe that's it, right? And if you keep going up, there's even another one of latitude and longitude in here. So locating yourself in the world and using the right coordinates is really crucial to being successful going forward. And so I just want to stress that here around Fredonia, where we're going to be doing the annual meeting, I want to highlight that there's at least two different sampling methods that you see here. Okay, and one is along a trail, and you can see that it clearly looks like a line. And that's really good if to follow to get some variety across a landscape, or to go try to describe a certain feature. But it clearly only describes again, a biased part of the landscape. But that can be a really useful way of doing your recordings and being able to actually show differences. So hats off to the person who did this in New York, because having this amount of density actually will allow us to use the data points together to, again, confirm that, yes, we're looking in the right locations. Okay, so lines have their value. And I like those because you can get a lot of variety, and you can get overlap like this. Plus, you can make it where you just stop every 5 minutes and you get to enjoy and you get to really describe that location that's around you. So it can be really valuable. The other way of sampling that is really useful, this is a great example, is pair points. Right. And so when you do this, again, it's really beneficial because here we are expecting two different land cover types that are really close to each other. And so, knowing that we have two different types like this is really necessary when we want to know or describe what is the size of that forest, or what is the size of that barren area? What is the size of Bear Lake, right? And so, right here, these pairs allow us to show that in this location, we actually have some differences, and we can compare the colors and many other measurements, between these two. And so you might hear this, you might know about a way of doing this called ANOVA, or analysis of variance, right? So pairs are another one of your friends for starting to learn about landscapes, and also be able to have confidence that your location is calibrated correctly right there. Okay, and then I want to zoom in here to what Brian was showing. Right behind him is we have this nice thematic map, right? That is very similar to what Brian has right behind him, right? Slightly different resolution. And here we can actually see that we don't have an even distribution of observations. So the sampling piece is really, really important if we wanted to describe what is within this circle area. And looking at a map, I get one view of it, but looking behind Brian, wow, I actually see that it looks like there's green grass area, and then, like he said, above him there is, some tree-like area. And so, this to me is going to be one of those pieces where, let's for this annual meeting, let's try to actually describe what is within this circular ring road. It makes it really nice because we have a contained area. My guess is the engineers actually did a pretty good job, and if we continued this on, it would be pretty circular. And so, having a defined area like that is also something that is going to be very unique if you switch over and are able to, switch and change your base maps and look at it in a different way. So I just want to stress that, right here, we're doing a really good job of of describing this lower kind of southeast area, right? But we don't really know much else of what's going on around there. And so, so that's where, again, one of the things that I've wanted, we've tried to sort of build on is this sampling piece, right? And I'm going to zoom in here, and then I'm going to switch it over to Brian so that you can actually get us some details here. But what I want to highlight is there's a variety of tools that will do this for you. And here I want to share with you, here is one strategy that we've used over the last couple of years that allows us to describe a 3 kilometer by 3 kilometer area. And again, part of what I'm getting at is it doesn't have to be this, but we really do need to have some way of sort of identifying an area that we want to study, what's within it, and describe that information. And so, so here, what I was able to do using this particular tool that was created is I was able to get a grid of points, and I was able to get geometry that shows me how much of an area is 3 kilometers. And if we zoom in, one of the things that you'll also see that got created is a 100-meter square area, very similar to that MGRS global grid that we were working on. And so, so the thing about this is now I actually can start to think about where I want to go, make my measurements. I have enough that I can actually do some comparisons, meaning I have over 30 samples. And then, importantly, I have a variety of coordinates that we can then send to a variety of NASA tools to try to find out, well, what's at that location, right? And so learning your latitude and longitudes is really going to be one of the most powerful things that you can do with your research. And getting a list of them allows you to do a lot of different things, and in particular, compare them with other data. And so, what I want to highlight is I'm going to download these 2 files. And one thing that you'll see is that we will go back to these exact locations and discuss these locations when we do our live from SUNY College here at Fredonia for our July Trees Around the Globe student research campaign. And one of the things that we'll be able to talk about is some of the variety of land cover types that are occurring within this particular community. And already I can see some interesting variation as we look across some of these different sample locations. But I want to highlight that these points now allow me to start identifying a good place to go. The grid allows us to make sure that we don't cluster ourselves like what previously we saw happening here, where we're just down here in this corner. And this is really vital when you start thinking about your data and trying to make a good science project. And so, Brian, I want to do one thing. I'm going to put these coordinates, these center coordinates, into the chat. And one of the things that I see a lot of people were texting me in here. But while I answer a couple of questions, Brian, would you mind going to Open Altimetry and pulling up our location right there and showing us a little bit of what that looks like, using the laser beams that we see? Because we're all mainly used to seeing this optical view of the world, but I'd be kind of curious, where is the closest LiDAR beam to this location?
All right, perfect. Yeah, go ahead. And Peter Falcon, let Peter just maybe you can answer some of those in the chat, unless you want to do those live right now, Peter Nelson, or I can jump right into Open Altimetry.
No, jump right into Open Altimetry, and we'll come back. And so I'll stop sharing right there. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of good things to go back and review here. And again, I want to stress, just getting those coordinates is the first step.
Oh, Peter, you do have some questions in the chat box. Maybe while Brian is showing Open Altimetry, you can answer some of those questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you, Peter, what do you see as like the first question?
Let me open up my chat once again.
Yeah.
So as Brian's doing that, Anna had a great question. She asked, where can I download the land surface temperature images to compare and analyze with field measurements?
Yeah, I'll look up the land surface temperature while Brian takes us to this particular location, because I was just looking for this data myself. And that's to me one of those things that we will be highlighting in July is, what are the data layers that you can use? Because NASA does have them defined. And so for every one of our locations, part of what we're trying to do as a campaign is to show you the global data that's available. Now, there's always going to be more specific location or data available locally, but we really want to, what can we do as a community to evaluate something like Open Altimetry, which has a global coverage to it?
And there's another question. What's the importance of photos, the down photos and the up photos in regard to land cover?
Yeah. So in terms of land cover, one thing you're getting is just, what is the land cover that's there? Is it barren? Is it asphalt? Is it concrete? What is in that location? And again, that brightness is part of what we're trying to record. And so, part of it, you can think about it essentially like a 1 meter tube, a sample that you're doing. And this is something that when you do the muck measurements, is something that you do 100 times or at every location that you stop at. And so it's a really narrow sample, but one of the things that we've seen is like Brian here, he's working at a 12-meter location. And so part of what we're trying to do is align our on-the-ground resolution that we see at 1 meters to these satellite resolutions that are getting much more precise, where we might actually be able to line up that up photo directly, with the light or the power pole or those overhead objects with the satellite data at exactly that location. And so again, this lining up, it's just a sample. And so, we need to sample many, many times to be able to come to conclusions. So that's why we want to encourage you not just to do one observation, but to remeasure that tree, actually. Measure that tree 3-4 times. All of those things give us confidence in those locations. And that's part of what NASA is providing to us is, those descriptions of how they're making their measurements. What is the positional accuracy? What is the wavelengths that they used, even, and various things like that. So, the up down, it's very much like what you do with the clouds. Why are we doing up down with the clouds? Well, it gives us that direct view up and down like that, which is closer to what the satellite is seeing. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And one last question before we go to Brian. For some of our students, when we're looking at satellite data, it can be a bit confusing. You have so many different variables. things get very colorful, do you have any cautionary tales for students? Not to get too deep into the woods, but just kind of go out
No,
there, grab what they need. Because
exactly.
I mentioned beforehand, about junk, about garbage data, unless you know what you
Unless you
need.
know what you're getting. So
Yeah.
for me, the big key is cite where you're getting your data. Because there's analysis ready data that's out there, and you can hop right on it and you can use it. And as long as you tell somebody this is where I got it, if there's any problems, well, that is because the developer made it like that, right? And so one of the things that you're trying to sort of do is describe where you got your data. And again, this is where, as a researcher, you don't have to create it all to do original research. And so finding that balance between a data set or something that works well and something that is perfect is part of what we're trying to evaluate right there. And so for me, the big thing is right now, unlike in the past, you can find a lot of satellite data in different libraries. So, if you go to Google Earth Engine, document that you go there. If you go to use the Globe Viz system, just document there. So to me, it's the documentation of where you're getting it from. And then somebody might say, oh, you should actually go here, or you should do it this way, or, oh, this is lying to you. Those are the things why we have our student research symposiums, is so we can have those conversations about, well, I tried doing this, and other people can come in and they can tell you, share their experience of doing something similar with it. So citation is really the key right now, because you'll find data everywhere. Yeah, like even including right behind Brian, right? Like he just did a screenshot off his computer. And so, so to me, that's one of those of like, I'm very skeptical of satellite data. And this will be the final thing that I say as I pass it to Brian to give us the waveforms. Is just because you see it doesn't mean that it's true. This is our science process of being skeptical until you have enough evidence that you've convinced yourself that, yeah, I'm not getting lied to. This is the colors that are there, or this is the shape of this, that it hasn't been manipulated in some way. So be skeptical and don't take what people show you for truth. Do your own research around it, and that to me is the place that we're in right now. That's the cautionary tale. So,
Thanks.
Brian.
Yeah, that's perfect, Peter, because when you mentioned about being skeptical, we just had our Globe Observer Connect event just before this webinar, and two research scientists at NASA, Dr. Soren Popescu and Dr. Bruce Cook, who many of the folks on the line have seen in the interview that we showed earlier several months ago. But they also discussed, when they were going in and looking at the tree height data, land cover data, they actually went in like that, right away thinking, am I able to trust this data? So they had to do some analysis with comparisons from ICESat-2 tree heights, and then also some land cover from Landsat. And, they did come across ones that they were skeptical, and they were skeptical for good reason, because there were some data points in the system that were at weird places where they shouldn't have been. But then also they said, they wanted to, really look at this data. So they did like what you did, Peter, with the API. They went and they focused during a particular time period in a particular location. And they realized that helped them out by just going to the Viz system and bringing up the full graphic. So they got a little more precise data, in specific locations during a specific time period. But they went into it as, hey, and we don't want everybody to say, oh, citizen science data is not good. It's good, but that's one of the things we're working on, is to make sure that data is good, to do some comparisons. But with that said, let me pop into Open Altimetry because we don't have much time. But I want to show you here, and that's basically the map that you see behind me, but I'm going to share this. Peter Nelson, can you see that on your screen?
Yep.
Look good? All right.
Good.
So this is when you land on here. I put in the chat several comments ago, the link to Open Altimetry. This is what you're going to get. So what you're going to get this global map, and all those lines that you see are as Peter mentioned earlier, those are the ICESat-2 orbit path or orbit tracks. And those dots that you see on there are the individual photons that hit. These are the most recent ones, the most recent tracks here. And then when you go over here, there's this little arrow just below the magnifying glass that allows you to look for a specific area. You can do it by country. You can select a country, and then when a country comes up, you can select an area, a city, a town. It probably come up. Or you can do a coordinate box with a lower left versus an upper right. Or you can put in a zoom to location by center. So I threw in the coordinates that will take us to where we're going to be for the Globe Annual Meeting in Fredonia, New York, in the US. So when you put the longitude and latitude, and I should also mention here, we're used to saying latitude, longitude. So when you put that information in here, it's going to have longitude first and latitude second. That's not us doing that. That's the folks at NSIDC doing that, because a lot of researchers throw the longitude in before the latitude. So, but, commonly, as the general public, we're usually say latitude, longitude. So make sure you don't put in, because if you put the latitude and longitude incorrectly, you're going to go off to a really weird part of the planet that you probably don't know where you're going to end up. So let me go ahead, and when I click update map, it's going to center whatever the location is here, the coordinates in the middle of the map. So it does take a couple of seconds to render. As you can see, now we are getting closer into Fredonia. You can kind of see the little circle in the middle. But these red ones, they're just like those green ones you saw. The green ones were the most recent orbit paths. These red ones are past ones. But what's cool about this is that if you just take your mouse and hover over the line and click on it one time, you will get when the data was closest by the location that you put in the center of the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, and I know basically with trial and error, you can click on all of these dates here, and you will see, and you will also see that they're all about, there are some that are missing, but usually they're about 3 months apart from each other, because the ICESat-2 satellite hits the same spot on the Earth every 91 days. Now, there are some that don't, because the satellite might have been in safe mode. Most recently, we had that pretty intense solar activity, and it actually caused the ICESat satellite to malfunction a bit and get off course with the solar energy. So we put it in safe mode, and as of yesterday, ICESat-2 was taken out of safe mode, and it's working perfectly again. But it was just some disturbance from that huge solar activity that we had recently, about a month or so ago. So I'm going to click on this one here, because I know where I'm going to find some things, but you will find these tracks, these photons will pop up. So I'm going to, and sometimes it takes a couple seconds for it to pop up. So it's it's showing that it's highlighting that area. So you just got to wait a second. Okay, there you get the one that runs right through the center of SUNY Fredonia. So I'm going to zoom in here. So what you're seeing here is when ICESat-2, for those of you who don't remember or just forgot, it's been a while, but when ICESat-2 fires out its laser beams, okay, these laser pulses, it basically pairs up the beams, but the mirrors on board in the Atlas instrument, the Advanced Topographic Laser Altimeter System, inside of ICESat-2 has beam splitters. So it splits it into these 3 paired beams. So it's essentially 6 beams, okay? And on each one of these, like you see the green and orange, the blue and purple, and then the yellow and green, these are what's called the strong beam and the weak beam. The strong simply means it contains more energy than the weak beam does. But I'm going to zoom in here just to see. We're just going to keep zooming in to where these photons run straight through Fredonia, SUNY Fredonia. And once in a while, sorry, it'll render, takes a second because it's pulling up a lot of data. But as you can see, as Peter mentioned, and I'll pause for a second, then Peter, if you want to mention anything about this in a second, but here is where we're going to be having the Globe Annual Meeting. And where my arrow is moving around, my cursor, this is the building where we're going to have most of the annual meeting. As you can see, it's just a short walk to this area that they call Forever Wild on campus, what Peter was mentioning as well. But you can see here that there are several photons on this day that actually went straight through this Forever Wild area. So how do we look at this photon data? So what I'm going to do is up on the top left, it says select a region. It's a blue box with white text. If I click on that, you're going to get these hatch marks. And all you have to do is hold down your mouse. Okay, just hold it down and then drag across all the photons that you want to include. And what happens is when you let it go, it asks you if you want to view the elevation profile or view the signal photons. We're going to look at the profile because two different graphs will come up. It'll open a new window like this. And you will see on the top, this will be the elevation and terrain. So the ground elevation and canopy surface. So it's showing you those individual photons, what the exact latitude and longitude. You can see they're pretty precise. They go out a lot of decimal points. But then when you scroll down, these trees that you saw right here, okay, the orange I'm going to point out first, you can scroll over those, and what you're going to see is you're going to see what the beam was, latitude, longitude, and what the canopy height was from ICESat-2. Now, as a refresher, ICESat-2, when it fires these laser photons, these photons get larger and larger and larger. So by the time it hits the ground, the light energy is gone, but the energy from the laser pulses is still there. So it creates a 13 diameter footprint on the ground. So what that means is that any tree height, or I should say any tree top that falls within that 13-meter diameter footprint that the ICESat-2 photon can bounce off of, it's going to give you the average of all of those trees that it can measure the top of within that 13-meter diameter footprint. Now, we know it's not an exact science comparing the globe observer tree height data to the ICESat-2 data, but it allows you to get better location accuracy. It allows you to see what the trees are doing in this area as well. So if you scroll over here, you can see, this one is 26.1 meters, 27.4, 27, and 27.8 meters tall. And then we have some green ones, which are the smaller ones in that location, 17.9, 20.6, and 15.1. So this gives you a combination of the ground elevation and canopy surface, as well as the canopy height. So let me bounce back to that, and I'm going to unselect this. And Peter, is there anything you want to mention about this? Because I know you can see a lot on here. The resolution's pretty good, and you can see this whole circle here. But there are lots of things in this environment, land cover wise. From the land cover tool on Globe Observer, it hits probably everything on that tool.
It really does, Brian. And so, I hope that people will join us for our live webinar from here next week or next month, because it really does within this short area, as I demonstrated, there's a lot, and we'll highlight, the different colors that we see here are those reflections. And I really look forward to, we've got two soccer fields right there that you're zooming in onto. And one thing I'll highlight, Brian, right now is, notice how it's an oval on this map versus on the Google map that you have behind you. It's more of a perfect square or a perfect circle. So again, this to me is a great demonstration of, just because you see a map on a browser doesn't mean that you don't have to think about what those numbers are, how that data is being displayed, how it's actually getting stretched from the circle of the globe onto this flat screen. And all of those start to become really, the advanced topics of what makes good science and some of the challenges that NASA is really trying to deal with, which is mapping out this world that is round, but yet dealing with these, two-dimensional flat surfaces, and distances and area and all of these complexities. And so, right here, I'm really looking forward to highlighting, this image was taken in leaf off conditions, actually. We can see evergreen right there underneath one of those orange dots. And so, so please join us, at our next live webinar from here, where we will continue talking about how do you take this type of information like we've been really showing and exploring today, and how do you go into the field and how do you compare these measurements from space to what you see on the ground? And so we'll definitely demonstrate the next step that you might do in your own research, and hopefully what you'll end up being able to do, to make these measurements real to your community and to your own measurements. So I'm really excited that we have this wonderful example. Brian, you've given us two different views of it, literally, and I think, our host, Mike Jabat there, will be able to, help facilitate these revisits and thinking about this change over time because of his contributions in the past. So I'm really looking forward to being able to continue this conversation. If you have any questions, I mean, we saw some in there, people asking about specific data sets. Let us know so that we can highlight what you're actually trying to investigate with our topics here. And there's a lot that can be done. And so we will be diving into these pixels in this place with our next webinar. And I hope that we didn't scare you off with, as we got into the details of, photons and waves and locations and decimal points and all those things that, are important. But really, the importance is having that curiosity about what's around you and what this data can show. So, thanks so much, Brian, for walking us through that. And I'm really looking forward to being able to jump into those pixels and try to understand what the heck are those gray colors and, and the green colors. And, just like there's a lot of strange variation in there that I think, our host will hopefully be able to describe maybe why some of these things look the way that they do.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. And I did just put in the chat, since we were talking open altimetry, Anna, who had to leave from Argentina, she actually, they have created some tutorials in Spanish, including a section on open altimetry. And I put that link in here, which is great. And then also, since Peter said we didn't want to confuse you about photons and lasers and all that stuff, I added the link to the ICESat-2 mission on there as well, so you can learn more about that. But yeah, hopefully, you'll be able to join us. And yes, it'll be a live webinar, so we will be on Zoom again. But then also we will be doing it live. So if you happen to be at the Globe annual meeting next month, please, join us. We don't know where it's going to be yet as far as where we're going to meet before we walk out there, but we will make an announcement at some point there. And then all walk out there as a group, probably maybe about an hour, 45 minutes before the webinar starts. You may find some of us, Peter and me and Peter, out there in the wooded area, and you won't see us at the meeting for a little bit because we're going to be scoping out the area. Since it's going to be Tuesday, it'll only be the second day of the annual meeting. So thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you either virtually or in person at the Globe annual meeting in Fredonia, New York next month. Take care, everyone.